This issue was my single most anticipated issue out of these Hero Reborn event comics. The second reason for that is because that I hoped that this one-shot somehow starred Rebel O'Reilly, one of the few new characters that was created in the Heroes Reborn books. Rebel was Tony Stark's best friend in college, and he died test piloting the original prototype of the Iron Man armor, which they called the Prometheum armor. But in true comics fashion, Rebel could not stay dead. He was resurrected as a cyborg by the forces of Hydra and sent after Tony Stark. The pair eventually calmed down and then teamed up in order to stop Hydra, but doing so killed Rebel. This time for realsies. Or was it? Unfortunately for my hopes and dreams, yeah, he's still dead and this book does not star him. He is not alive, somehow acting as a gunslinger in the lawless West. However, I would argue that my interest is exactly why Marvel named this book Rebel. They were trying to draw in those few comic readers who enjoyed Iron Man Volume 2, and man, they got me good. Nicely played, Marvel. But I have another reason for reading this issue, my main reason, my first reason. I've mentioned before, back in episode 1.14, that Marvel has largely steered clear of using the Reborn concepts, save for a very few isolated incidents. One of those incidents was Fabian Niciez's run on the first volume of Thunderbolts. I love the Thunderbolts. It is probably easily one of my top 10 Marvel books of all time, hands down, period. And in issue 51, Nicieza used this new Rebel character, and I was lost. I had no idea who this guy was or why he was wearing Reborn Iron Man's armor. You know, I had read some of that book and I had dug that armor design, but I didn't know how it all ended. So putting this collection together finally scratched that old itch for me. Finally, after years, I would learn who that character was and where he came from. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown, episode 12.17, Heroes Reborn, Rebel. Heroes Reborn Rebel was written by Joe Kelly, drawn by Matt Halley, with assistance by Mark Bagley, Scott Koblish, and Mark Bernardo, with inks by Steve Lieber and colors by Moose Bauman. Is that right? Moose Bauman? Alright. We open in Quixote, a small ruined town in the Santa Ana province. Our leading man narrates his dialogue very informal and relaxed, and tells us that there's only one reason to go here: the Tabernacle with a capital T. This particular house of God captures people and then turns them into docile acolytes, although Rebel says that it's more like slaves. We see a group of armed men wearing what look like laser tag chest pieces and white helmets doing so. On the back of their helmets is a cross, although the bottom of it is pointed like a dagger. These holy men are being led by an angry cuss by the name of Crossbones. Now, we've seen Crossbones before, back in Captain America Volume 2. He was a large, strong, silent bruiser who worked for the Red Skull. He beat up and captured Sam Wilson and Captain America. He literally didn't say a single line of dialogue in those comics. He just wore a face mask that was vaguely skull-like and fought Captain America. But he is not the same as when we last saw him. Crossbones was irradiated when Kalivata got nuked in 1998, and he has mutated. Now his entire body is albino, white, sinewy muscle. Small, bone-like growths jut from his forearms, elbows, and upper back. His face is super skeletal, like his lips are pulled back always to reveal his teeth. A red cross, matching that of the troops, adorns his forehead. He sneers at our lead as he wipes green blood from his split gums, evidence of a left hook across the face. Crossbone tells the stranger that he had better have enjoyed that punch, because it's going to be his last act on Earth. The camera swings around to our hero, but it is a tight close-up, revealing little of his face. Stubble runs along the man's jaw, and shoulder-length brown hair sways in the hot breeze. A scar runs diagonally on the face, down and away from the tear duct. "No," he says, "that was just an appetizer." The camera then pulls out, giving us a full body shot of Rebel. He wears one of the Prometheum armors, but it has clearly seen better days. Rebel doesn't wear the helmet that it comes with at all, and his left arm is bare. An ammo belt circles his waist, a worn gray poncho covers his chest, and a flat-brim hat obscures his face. He points at Crossbones, and basically tells the monster to GTFO. Crossbones charges at Rebel, but the armored man ducks and smashes his enemy's knee in with a precise kick. Crossbones backhands him in retaliation, buying his knee time to knit itself back together. Then he shoves Rebel down, reaching for his neck so he can choke him. The gunslinger pulls back and asks Crossbones if he's ever seen blue sky, spelled S-K-Y-E. And Crossbones replies that the only blue sky left to them is the house of his father, meaning God. Rebel sighs. Yeah, that's what he figured. He fights to get a foot up, pointing its jet at Crossbones' face, and then he ignites it. Crossbones shouts in pain and pulls back, but he's still standing. He swears to kill Rebel, but Rebel draws his pistols, and energy blasts tear into Crossbones' body. Like, he is literally torn apart, like his decapitated head rolls away from his body. A voice tells Rebel that if he's going to work solo, let him know. He'll stay in with his romance novels next time. 3 people stand behind Rebel, who kneels for a moment, his head bowed. One is a red-skinned salamander man, wearing shades and carrying an unlit flamethrower. The second is a woman wearing a simple white robe, her hands folded into her sleeves, her black hair worn back in a ponytail. The third member wears green and brown clothes and is strapped down with weapons. This is Pepper Potts, who is very impressed by that fight. How did Rebel move that fast? Rebel whips his head around, glaring over his shoulder at her, but he doesn't say anything. The woman in white, named Michka Rose, rests a hand on his shoulder. He stands, and they start to walk away. Pepper turns to the salamander man, named Guinness. Rebel looked like he wanted to kill her with that glare. Guinness, who is smoking a cigar, says that he probably did want to kill her. Rebel gets like that after killing someone. Given time, you'll just learn not to look. Author Joe Kelly has a lot of work to do with this one-shot. I mean, any author does when they're writing a 22-page one-shot, really. The Southwest isn't an area that really got explored in the Reborn books, and this time it is also gamma-irradiated. We need to learn what life is like there, who is in charge of that area, who Rebel is rebelling against, why he is doing so, and who our supporting cast is, and what they mean to Rebel, and vice versa. Despite this challenge, though, I think that Kelly is off to a pretty good start here. Making Kalivata gamma-irradiated is clever, if kind of vague. The radiation means that only the desperate will either live here or come here, immediately establishing the kind of person that we're going to run into. I'm not sure about why California and Nevada were merged into one state, as we haven't really gotten any background on what's happened to the American infrastructure at this point. I mean, Chicago seemed fine in the Masters of Evil one-shot, and other than New York and San Francisco being flooded, we honestly know nothing about the rest of the country. I've been assuming that the basic nature of America was the same. You know, that there are 50 states run by local government, which is then overseen by the federal government, topped off by the 3 branches of government, that kind of thing. But clearly that is not the case here, and it kind of bothers me that we don't get a better explanation. Choosing Crossbones as a villain is a fine move, nothing terribly surprising there, save for his religious turn. Any differences in his behavior or personality, like how much he likes to talk now, can be chalked up to the gamma mutation. This also has the bonus effect of making Crossbones as monstrous physically as he is emotionally. Remember, he was a killer for the Red Skull previously. And although new readers wouldn't know this, in the 616 Marvel Universe, Crossbones is also a sadistic a-hole who just enjoys hurting people. Paint over that personality defect with a heavy coat o' God's blessing, and you've got one dangerous zealot. So he's dangerous, he looks monstrous and honestly kinda cool, and he's a pretty good disposable villain for Rebel to show his skills off against here at the start of the book. And that's the main thrust of this opening, introducing Rebel. So what did this scene tell us? We get to see that Rebel is brave, challenging Crossbones despite being outnumbered and seemingly outpowered. He's clever, using what few systems his armor has left wisely, although I really want to know how he works it without the helmet, and how he found it. I'm not sure if Rebel is actually heroic, though, or if he's just opportunistic. His introduction sure makes it look like he's defending the people of Quixote, but he doesn't attack Crossbone's men once Crossbone is dead, and he waits until Crossbone answers about Blue Sky before killing him. Perhaps fighting Crossbones and saving the people was just a byproduct of questioning the villain, who is an authority figure in these parts, and that means that he might have intelligence that Rebel needs. Or maybe Rebel did intend to help the people, and the Blue Sky thing was just a long shot in the dark. It's hard to tell. But he is on the hunt, and clearly his allies follow him warily. Michka and Guinness appear to be familiar with Rebel, while Pepper seems new, so how she reacts to Rebel is probably going to be a way to explain new things about him to us as the audience. Finally, it is important to note our location. Quixote is a reference to Don Quixote, a story about a noble named Alonso Quijano, who reads so many fantasy stories that he falls in love with them and goes mad. He becomes a knight-errant and goes on ridiculous adventures, most notably that there is a time when he attacks a windmill, believing that it is a giant. The word quixotic derives from his heroic name, Don Quixote de la Mancha, and refers to someone who is chivalrous but unrealistic, or an idealist. What author Joe Kelly is telling us with his use of that name is that someone here is chasing windmills. We already know that Rebel is looking for a person or a place called Blue Sky, so perhaps this thing isn't what Rebel thinks it is. Hopefully we'll find out. The story then moves to an unknown location where we meet God. Or rather, a guy who thinks that he's God. Once upon a time, this was Masterman, another old ally of the Red Skull, but the Gamma has changed him too. Now Masterman is tall and ripped, his muscles showing through his small pieces of white clothing. A full beard and mane of white hair adorn his face as he rages over Pepper Potts' band, ruining his good works. He loves his maggots. He turns to a nearby acolyte, their eyes sewn shut, their mouth sewn partially, and their forehead branded with the dagger cross. The acolyte bows, mumbling that his is the power and the glory, and that helps calm Masterman. Yes, before he was blinded by nationalities and slogans, but now he sees the truth. Now he can see the sin. He can see Rebel for the devil that he is. Masterman grabs the acolyte by the neck and in his fervor squeezes. He'll save the poor devil, though. Purge him of his sin and purify his soul. The acolyte's head pops, showering Masterman in blood. Satisfied for now, he speaks to someone, ordering them to bring him the parson, and they reply that his will be done. This is a quick scene, only 2 pages, and it is an interesting 2 pages to me. Not because Masterman is inherently interesting, although I do think that him evolving from a nationalist zealot to a religious zealot is an interesting move. I'll give Kelly that. But it's interesting to me because what a scene like this implies. Kelly is showing us the structure of this religion, the Tabernacle, but in storytelling terms, he is also setting up our bad guy power structure, which would be a smart move if Rebel was going to be an ongoing series, and we would eventually work our way up to defeating Masterman and freeing Kalivata from him. But this isn't. This is a one-shot. We're in, and then we're out. The only villains that matter are the ones that we are going to be outright facing, and Masterman isn't one of them. So that's a little weird. Out in the desert, Rebel's group has made camp for the night. Pepper is trying to get them to go north, where they can recruit people to their cause, train them, and then take down Masterman. But Rebel isn't planning on organizing or training anyone. Guinness supplies that they will take down the Tabernacle, sure, but then they're headed east. He hears there are newt women in Chicago. Rawr. Actually, we've just come from Chicago, Guinness, and as far as I could see, there were no newt women, man. Sorry. Frustrated by Guinness's flippancy and Rebel's emotional distance, Pepper quits the conversation, crossing their small campfire. We stay with Rebel, though, who starts to inner monologue about how everyone wants him to save the world, while all he wants to do is have one last look at Skye. Then he falls asleep and dreams of her. Rebel, younger without his scars, stands in a golden field. A beautiful blonde woman in diaphanous robes approaches him with her arms wide, but they don't embrace. She stays a few steps away, fingers caressing his cheek. Why can't he forget her? She left him for dead, but with his heart still beating in his chest. Despite the animosity between them, he has to find her. He has to. When his eyes snap open, it's dawn, and Guinness is shaking him awake. "Kiss me and I'll punch you," the salamander says. Rebel rouses himself, threatening to eat Guinness instead. The other guy smiles. "You're the one who didn't want to eat with Pepper Potts, boss. Ain't Guinness's fault that you're so hungry that you passed out." Guinness then shifts gears. Their plan was to head east, sure, but the only thing out that way is another shot at finding Blue Sky. But here, with Potts, they can do some good right in the here and now. Rebel has that armor for a reason, and Guinness transformed from a salamander to walking upright for a reason too. Maybe this is that reason. 'Cause it sure ain't chasing Rebel's crazy ex who tried to garrote him with fishing wire. Rebel finishes packing his bedroll. "It was guitar string," he counters, and then stomps off. He tells Guinness that the fireworks start in an hour. As he fades out of earshot, Guinness quietly says for him to be careful. Not only could Rebel ruin this job, but he could also ruin something special that he is totally unaware of. That line is delivered on a page turn in a panel with the distracted face of Michka Rose. But before we move on, we just learned a few things. First off, the power structure of this little group has been called into question. Pepper Potts is clearly the one most invested in taking down Masterman and helping people, a drive that is perhaps left over from working with her boss as Iron Man. Rebel's main focus seems to be finding Blue Sky, and taking down Masterman is just a coincidental, unexpected bonus. But if that's the case, why are these two working together? Is Potts paying Rebel and his group to help her? Or is Rebel using Potts' cause to work his way through the Tabernacle? Because if that's the case, then what does he get out of putting up with her? Guinness's conversation with Rebel tells us that Potts clearly annoys Rebel, so much so that he went to bed without eating in order to avoid talking to her. So how did these two meet up and start working together? In an ongoing series, that's something that we could explore down the line, but in a one-shot, it makes our story muddled and vague, and that's a very important distinction. We also learn that Blue Sky is definitely a woman and that she broke Rebel's heart. In his dream, it's clear that Rebel is still in love with her, but it's also clear that Sky definitely tried to kill him. Remember when I talked about chasing a thing that isn't what it appears to be earlier, the whole Don Quixote speech? That's Rebel chasing Sky, thinking that he is searching for a woman that he loves, but she's actually someone who tried to kill him. I get the feeling that even if Rebel finds Sky, it isn't going to be a happy reunion. Back in the story, Pepper says Michka's name sharply a few times, dragging her mind back from wherever it had wandered to. The pair are at the Tabernacle, I guess? I'm not sure, as no one tells us where they are, and the artwork just has them pressed against a wall, so we're so zoomed in that we don't get to see the entire structure or the area, so I don't really know. We can make out a white tent and a handful of armed guards, though. Pepper says that they have eyes on the Tabernacle's entry point. Okay, so we are at the Tabernacle. Got it. That's my bad. Should have read a little more. First, they need to remove the guards, then they can place the explosive, and finally just go for it. So, it is time for Michka to do her thing. Michka moves just past the barrier that they hide behind, and then she sings. Rebel's narration over this scene introduces an indigenous American idea called the Wind of Sorrows, quote, a mystery breeze that can blow through a man's soul, carrying all the sadness in the world, end quote. When Michka's done, all of the guards have collapsed, although I'm not exactly sure what happened to them. Did they just collapse into deep, soul-crushing depressions? Did their brains explode from sadness? Did her singing obliterate their souls or just knock them out? Like, the explanation of her powers sounds poetic AF, but it doesn't help me understand her powers at all. Pepper joins Michka and pulls out her earplugs, impressed. Just once she would like to hear Michka's song. What is she singing about anyways? Pepper asks. Michka kneels and writes in the dirt with her finger. A man. A betrayal. Pepper blinks. Does she mean rebel? But then a voice welcomes them into God's grace. And we cut away. A short time later, Rebel finds himself in a similar position. He's outside what I'm assuming is the same tabernacle as guards escort a herd of people into it. They're nervous. Word of Crossbone's death has shaken them. This puts a smile on Rebel's face. Maybe Guinness was right. Maybe finding this armor was no accident. Maybe it's time to embrace that. Maybe it's even time to let Sky go. A man's voice, proud and loud, rings out from the tabernacle, challenging Rebel to come out and face him, quoting scripture the entire time. A black man wearing all white robes, decorated at the chest with 2 pointed crosses, stands just outside of the doorway, a flaming staff raised over his bald head in both hands. 4 armed men flank him, and Pepper Potts lies unconscious at his feet. The parson welcomes Rebel back. Won't he pray with him? Ooh, that's interesting. The parson welcomes Rebel back. This implies that Rebel was once a member of the Tabernacle, at least to some degree, and that he left. So is he called Rebel because he's left the church and now he fights against them? Is he a literal rebel and it's not just a nickname? Rebel talks to Guinness instead, shouting for him to, quote, rain fire, end quote. The Salaman pops up out of the dirt to the parson's left, aims his flamethrower, and douses the men in flames. But the parson waves his staff, either blocking or redirecting the flames away from him. The guards are consumed by them instead, and this opening lets Rebel open fire with his guns. The parson returns fire with his own flames, shooting them from the staff, although neither man's projectiles connect. Guinness dashes over to Pepper, assuring her that he'll get her out of here. Pepper's regained consciousness, though, and croaks out a warning. Michka is one of the Tabernacle. She walked them right into this trap. This news goes unheard by Rebel as he's still battling the parson. The holy man berates Rebel, calling that armor a crutch. That is Rebel's real problem. He's never been strong enough on his own, not strong enough to commit to a religion, never strong enough to commit to Sky. That's why he lost her, isn't it? These accusations seem to hit home for Rebel, and then a strike from the parson destroys Rebel's gun. Watching this from a distance is Michka. She pulls open her robe, revealing the dagger robe? She pulls open her robe, revealing the dagger cross brand on her clavicle. That's just above the chest, but below the neck for y'all who didn't pass anatomy. She looks down in shame, or maybe disgust, upset with herself. Unarmed, Rebel can do little against the parson as he continues to attack. The holy man continues to go on verbally as well. Skye was a woman of commitment, wasn't she, unlike Rebel? And he ruined her. He poisoned her mind. That's why she left him, and hit after hit from the Parson's staff connects. Rebel is left reeling on his knees, denying it all. The Parson aims his staff at Rebel's head. Only through divine fire can Rebel be forgiven, and the Parson is willing to cleanse him. But he never gets the chance. A shrieking sound detonates the Tabernacle building above them all, the black tower exploding outward. Michka, surrounded by a hail of glass and burning sand, drops to the ground. She sings, aiming her voice at the Parson. He falls back, covering his ears, but Rebel hears her song for the first time. He describes it, quote, "It's acid guilt, it's tornado hate, it's harmony to the mountaintop, reflecting Michka's soul, and it's truth," end quote. Rebel's eyes go wide as he learns that Michka loves him. The Parson swings his staff around, flinging fire as he does so. One of those flame blasts connects with Michka, and she screams in pain. Guinness screams as well, but Rebel is too shocked to really react. He gingerly picks up Michka's body, and the Parson stands over them both. How many young women need to be destroyed before Rebel will stop? "Come back to us," the Parson says to Rebel. "Be baptized and forgiven." Rebel looks at the Parson with murder in his eye. No need for a baptizing. He's been reborn once before. He sets Michka down, stands, and then Rebel tears the poncho aside, exposing the chest plate of the armor. A torrent of energy blasts out, engulfing the Parson, but the blast doesn't kill him. Not yet. Guinness rushes over toward Michka. She's not dead yet, but they are running out of time. He shouts to try to get Rebel's attention. Pepper is with the salamander, and she tells Rebel to hurry up and kill that bastard. Rebel puts his hat back on, and his chest starts to charge again. He hoists the Parson up, and the man says that he forgives Rebel for this. But Rebel isn't interested in forgiveness. He tells the Parson to let God know that he's taking care of things now. Rebel isn't going to let these idiots sully his holy name any longer. The Parson replies with a croak. If he dies, so too does the location of blue sky. Rebel calls the Parson a liar. But the Parson cannot lie. Did Rebel forget his oaths? He's offering Rebel a choice. His wrath or his love. When we see Rebel next, he's walking away from the crackling energy that is where the enemy once was. Pepper missed it. The Parson's gone. What happened? Rebel walks past her to Guinness, not answering the question. He asks after Michka. Guinness replies that she's a fool, risking her life for Rebel, but she'll be okay if they can get her to a doctor. She reaches out for him, She reaches out for Rebel, her hand shaking in pain, but tears in his eyes. Rebel doesn't take it. Instead, he turns away, telling Guinness to get Michka to the nearest Sawbones. If they steal a jeep, they should be fine. Guinness is shocked by this. How can he leave? She just took that blast for him. She saved his no swearing life. What kind of man can just walk away from that? Rebel lowers his head and answers. No man at all. Then he activates his boot jets and flies off. Narration picks up as Rebel soars away, but this time he's not the one narrating. This time it's an outside party, and I only bring it up because of one specific moment. Having abandoned a woman who would die for him, the narration comments that when a man is lost in a quest, he doesn't see anything else. Not the sun or moon, right or wrong, especially if he thinks that the goal is the key to his heart. Remember when I brought up Don Quixote living in a dream? Chasing an ideal that isn't close to reality at all? This moment echoes that reference, which means that we've got us a reveal coming. Rebel flies through a ruined city, although we aren't told which one it is. He lands outside of a hotel, then rushes inside, stepping into the apartment that the Parson told him about. Inside it, he finds a child. The kid's black pants are torn at the knee, his shirt sleeves torn off. A dirty mop of blonde hair rests on his head, and he stares up at Rebel. Hanging around his neck is a wooden sign with one word written on it. Yours. Ooh, scandalous. Now, as impactful and ominous as this ending is, I don't really like it. Because here's the thing, and this is probably my biggest problem with the Rebel one-shot overall. This is supposed to be a one-shot, but it reads like a first issue. You see, a one-shot needs to introduce its world, characters, and narrative, set them upon some kind of journey, probably give us a bit of action or violence, which isn't necessary, but it's nice, and then resolve the journey and end the book in a satisfying manner. For example, the Masters of Evil one-shot from last week. We met our main cast, the Black Knight and Whirlwind, along with supporting characters like the Melter and Radioactive Man. We got our location, which was Chicago. We learned what our leads wanted. The Black Knight wanted the respect that he thought he was due, while Whirlwind wanted to escape the super part of being a super villain and just retire. In the comic, we watched them struggle to achieve these goals, and then the book wrapped up their narratives, denying the Black Knight his want by killing him, and giving Whirlwind his want by appealing to his fellow supercriminals' humanity. One and done. And while sure, perhaps more stories could be told using this location or with the surviving characters, there's nothing really to pick up on. Nothing is left dangling with a sense of urgency. It's over. And it works. The same can't be said of Rebel. The book spends most of its time setting up ideas to explore later, like showing us Masterman at the beginning, or Rebel's various relationships with Skye, Potts, Michka, and the Tabernacle, or even this ending where Rebel's child is essentially dumped on him. These are all ideas that need to be explored in depth, as they directly affect our lead character, but they can't be fully explored in this one-shot because it's over. The Masterman scene is a small thing, and I brought this up a bit earlier, but introducing a big, overarching, final boss-style bad guy is a bad idea here. Crossbones worked well as a demonstration of what the Tabernacle really is, and to establish Rebel as a character. And the Parson made for a good physical and emotional threat later on in this issue. He specifically knew Rebel and about his relationship with Skye, and that's a fine villain for this story. We don't need more. So if you removed Masterman from this completely, and that's 2 more pages to dedicate to something else, and nothing would have changed. Masterman establishes nothing other than that the Tabernacle is bad, which Crossbones already did, and that is something that the Parson will reinforce later anyways. The only thing that the Masterman scene establishes otherwise is that he vaguely sends the Parson after Rebel's group, but that's also pointless. We don't get to see enough of the inner workings of the Tabernacle to understand their structure very well, so from our perspective, if we showed up later at the attack on the Tabernacle and the Parson was there, we wouldn't think that there was anything wrong with that. We don't know where the Parson is normally, so as far as we're concerned, there's no point in having Masterman send him there. Plus, since Masterman did send the Parson to where Rebel was going to attack, I have to then ask, how did he know where Rebel was going to be? Other than super strength, Masterman has no established superpowers, so it isn't like he's psychic, he didn't sense him, and no one reported on Rebel's direction or plans in this issue. An argument could perhaps be made that Michka told Masterman or reported to the Tabernacle somehow, but we are shown in the comic that she doesn't talk, so I find that unlikely, and there is never a moment that would indicate that Michka did so. Secondly, Rebel's relationships with his supporting cast are pretty unbalanced. And this is a very subtle issue because the characters are honestly pretty interesting in and of themselves. In a book that takes itself as seriously as this one just did, Guinness is an outright treat. He's the positive, joking, upbeat contrast to the brooding, self-hating Rebel, and that is a relationship that works well. But when those two characters interact, it is clear that Rebel is the leader of the two, directing their lives, and Guinness is their shared conscience. But then there's Pepper Potts, who is what in this relationship exactly? When Masterman rages about the death of Crossbones, he actually doesn't complain about Rebel. He complains about Pepper Potts and her heathen brood. When we return to Rebel's group and they're camping for the night, Potts is the one trying to get them to ally further with her and begin to build a rebellion force. But then they say no, but kind of say yes, because they do stick to the plan, but what is the deal here? These characters clearly know each other, even if Potts is relatively new to the group. But did she hire Rebel and his friends to work for her? If so, what was she paying them with? What was the incentive for it? And what exactly was the job? Just to take down Masterman? And if this group is hired help, why does Rebel decide, mid-job, that they're heading east and not suffer any pay docking or threats or anything like that? The main idea here is that Potts is an idealist. She is fighting to make life better for the people of Kalivata, while Rebel is only out for himself, fighting to learn the location of Blue Sky. That idea works, and I actually think that it's demonstrated very well, but how those two ideas interact is done terribly. Potts is their leader, but Rebel overrules her, sometimes, and then they make a plan to attack the Tabernacle that no one agrees to, but then Michka goes along with it, and then Rebel decides to show up, and then just, what the fuck? No swearing! What is happening here? I have similar problems with Michka. To be fair, I think Michka's basic role in this comic is well done. She is the only good example of the Tabernacle that we see, someone who does the right thing and saves lives, even if it goes against the will of the church. I like her as an emotional foil to Rebel as well. Despite her silence, she sticks with the group for the attack. She ends up taking that hit for Rebel, and she reveals her feelings to him, that she loves him. Potts, Guinness, and Michka are all meant to draw Rebel away from being a self-concerned a-hole. And the tragedy of this issue is that it doesn't work. That stuff is great. That's good storytelling. But again, the logistics of it. Because it ends up being revealed that Michka isn't just a former member of the Tabernacle, but that she is a member right now. Potts says that Michka lured them into a trap, but I don't see how that's possible. From what we can tell, the plan to attack the Tabernacle was Potts's idea, and as far as we could see, everything was going according to plan, even Rebel and Guinness showing up despite saying that they weren't going to engage in the plan. The only unsuspecting surprise here was that the parson showed up, and he could clearly overpower both of the ladies, so what exactly did Michka revealing her allegiance to the Tabernacle do? Nothing. It did absolutely nothing. And then, at the end, when Rebel finds his son, god damn. No swearing, if that isn't a great hook. We just spent a whole issue watching Rebel be tempted to be a better person, then got to see him spit in that idea's face and abandon his friends and allies, one of whom was injured while saving his life, and then he goes to find his old love and he gets a kid instead. That is an amazing amount of responsibility for a man who has been shown to be irresponsible, and I love it. I wouldn't mind seeing more of that, in issue 2 where Rebel grabs his son and then goes back to the group and awkwardly has to ask for their help in taking care of them because Rebel has no idea what he's doing, and honestly, I don't think finding his son would satisfy Rebel. He is in love with the idea of what Blue Sky was. He's not going to stop hunting for her just because he has this new responsibility, and again, that's fascinating. But we don't get an issue 2, so no swearing. Me. And if we aren't getting an issue 2, why end this issue here? I can't even make a good argument that Kelly was hoping to get Rebel picked up for an ongoing series, because that doesn't seem to be the point of the Heroes Reborn event. I have said it repeatedly, but this event isn't celebrating the world of Heroes Reborn, and almost none of the stories that happen here are ever referenced or followed up on again. This is pretty much just a cash grab for the people who had some leftover love for the Reborn books and those who had been reading Claremont's Fantastic Four. This is not a starting point for new ideas. Now, maybe it could have been. Maybe someone at Marvel was sitting there hoping that these books would sell well enough to continue publishing any number of them. But if that's the case, then all of these books should feel like first issues. All of the books should have unsolved mysteries and potential story ideas that could lead us into another 6 issues of content, but they don't. Our next issue, Remnants, is perhaps even more of a one-shot than Masters of Evil was, so it really feels like that wasn't the intention of these books. Now, despite my problems with the overall structure and kind of the delivery of this issue, I have to say that I do actually enjoy it. Author Joe Kelly delivers a much more straightforward narrative than Joe Casey did with the Masters of Evil, but that's fine. Kelly is also telling us less upfront, preferring to let the characters speak for him. From dialogue cues, my understanding is that Rebel and Blue Sky were 2 teenagers/young adults who fell in love and were members of the Tabernacle. It sure sounds like Rebel got Sky pregnant, as evidenced by the child at the end, but judging by Rebel's shocked reaction to that kid, he didn't know that. So I think that Sky got pregnant and wanted Rebel to marry her, or perhaps the church was going to force them to marry. I could see that. Rebel couldn't, though. Remember, the parson accuses Rebel of being unable to commit to Sky. It's a very specific accusation. And in failing to do so, in a hurt rage, perhaps Sky tried to kill Rebel, attempting to either slice his throat or choke him to death with guitar string. But she couldn't bring herself to kill him. Rebel could have passed out, and then Sky just disappeared. Rebel has spent his life since searching for her, hoping to find the girl that he fell in love with and hopefully set things right. Without an explanation as to why she was leaving him or why she tried to kill him, he has spent all this time wondering and beating himself up, and so he has become bitter and angry. Although it's never stated, I like to think that Sky did slice Rebel's throat, and Rebel found the Prometheum armor and used it to keep himself alive, mirroring Tony Stark's journey to becoming Iron Man. He does tell the parson that he has been reborn once before, implying that he died once before, which admittedly doesn't have to be literal, he could be speaking metaphorically, but I like my idea. I like to think that he did die once before and that armor saved his life, and now he's trying to almost be a better person, almost. This still leaves a lot of questions, of course, like, where is Blue Sky? Is the Tabernacle protecting her from Rebel, moving her around the countryside to keep her safe? Or is this Sky's decision, and like Rebel, she has become bitter and angry about her lover spurning her? What's Rebel's real name, as I don't really think that he is named Rebel at all? Given the revelations about his past shown here, it definitely feels like more of a label that the Tabernacle has put on him, something to make him even more of an outsider, and thus easier for the church members to hate. It's also probably easier for him to deal with just being Rebel, rather than the person that he used to be, because whoever he used to be sucks. If I read his background right, Rebel turned his back on the woman that he loved, the responsibilities that come with such a relationship, and his church. He also shows no concern for the lives of those suffering under the Tabernacle's rule. Remember, he was willing to leave this fight in order to continue hunting Sky, and it's only Guinness appealing to his more virtuous nature that keeps him involved. Plus, at the very end, when Rebel is given the choice between saving the life of Michka or potentially finding Sky, he abandons Michka. Now, I don't blame Rebel for failing to return Michka's feelings. No one is obligated to love anyone, regardless of how that person feels about them. Just because Michka loves Rebel, that doesn't mean that Rebel has to love her back. But he should be grateful for her sacrifice and honest with her about he feels in return. He can respect her and her feelings, even if he doesn't return them, but Rebel fails to do even that. He doesn't even take the time to make sure that she'll survive her injuries, at least repaying her for that sacrifice. That's cold. Despite this kind of sucky character that we have with this issue, that is also a good thing from a story standpoint. Every good story requires its characters to grow, to develop depth as they journey and encounter people. And we start to see Rebel turn away from his selfish quest in order to help people. While he isn't a believer in Potts' optimism, nor does he enjoy following her lead, Guinness does convince him that there is good work that they can do, that he wears that armor for a reason, much like the man who wore it before him. Remember, Tony Stark was a massive a-hole before the accident that made him Iron Man, and it took nearly dying and the loss of his friend Bruce Banner for him to pull his head out of his butt and accept his responsibilities. Rebel was just starting to walk down that path when he swerves. And while that isn't a great character trait for a hero, it is an interesting story decision, and I applaud that. I also think that it fits with the overall feeling and tone that Claremont had established for the reborn Earth back in Doomsday. This isn't a planet of heroes anymore. This is a planet of desperate people doing what they can. We are rooting for a supervillain to save the reborn Earth, we sighed with relief when Whirlwind survived the Masters of Evil comic, and now we see a man who could be a hero do something self-serving instead. That feels kinda right for this world, even if it doesn't feel right internally or morally. That said, the characters that Kelly surrounds Rebel with are intriguing on their own. Pepper Potts was quite the firebrand in Iron Man's own comic. She was the only person who knew that he was Iron Man, and she was the only person who would actively put Tony in his place. That remains true here, where Pepper is the one who wants to take down the Tabernacle, and tells Rebel off when he doesn't want to. Plus, as Stark's former secretary, it makes sense that Rebel would have an easier time taking charge and organizing things, like, for example, a rebellion. I'm intrigued as to why and how she got out west, because we last saw her in New York City, but that's not terribly relevant to our narrative here, so that doesn't bug me nearly as much as some of my other complaints. Guinness is a gem. I always love monstrous-looking characters who aren't actually monstrous, and as someone who grew up catching newts in the streams near our property, I've got a lot of affection for this guy. He's also clearly the comic relief, the normal one out of the party, who is relaxed, jokes, and actively cares for everyone. He is meant to be endearing, and he clearly has history with Rebel, as the man listens to Guinness more than anyone else in the book. Michka is much more of a mystery, and at least that's interesting. For starters, her name was pretty alien to me. Originally, and largely because she looks Asian to me, I thought that this was just a misspelling of Michika, a Japanese name. But the internet tells me that Michka is an actual name in and of itself. Names.org tells me that Michka means gift of love, which seems very appropriate given her character's journey here, sacrificing her life to save the man that she loves. I also like that Michka is someone who is the complete opposite of Blue Sky. Where Sky was voluptuous and blonde, Sky is smaller with dark hair. Where we hear Sky speak in Rebel's dreams, Michka doesn't speak at all. Where Sky's religious faith drove her away from Rebel, maybe pushing her to try to kill him, Michka actually turned on her faith in order to save him. This is a super good balance, and I would love to see more of Michka's life, like what brought her to where we start at, how she got her powers, and how she moves forward with her life after this rejection, especially if she stays with the group. She is easily the most selfless person here, and I really hope that she survives her injuries. Artistically, I'm kind of amazed that this issue works at all. We've got 4 different pencilers and 2 inkers, although the credits do give Joe Kelly and Matt Halley credit for creating Rebel. Traditionally in comics, whoever draws a character first in a comic book gets the creator rights, and thus receives profits from any future licensing deals. So this immediately helps to clear up the issue of rights, despite 4 different artists drawing this one particular comic. Matt Halley isn't a name that I'm very familiar with. Internet searching reveals that he has done a lot of work for DC. Perhaps his most high-profile project was doing the comic book-style artwork for Stan Lee's Superheroes TV show. That's kinda neat. But I do think that Halley is a good fit here. The characters are kept fairly realistic looking, except for Masterman and Guinness, one of whom is like super buff, and the other is, a salamander. The inking here is done very roughly. It's more like brushwork than pen, and that makes everything feel and look dirty. Rebel's armor, despite its origins, is dented, beaten, and worn in places. One of the exhaust fins is actually completely gone. The darker shadows that Halley uses and the cover from the poncho also make the armor look much more organic. It kind of makes me think of the technology designs from the Alien films, that H.R. Giger rigid organic look. Given how Western-inspired this story is, I do think that the artwork does a good job of capturing that kind of feel. The pages with Mark Bagley stand out to me like crazy, but Bagley has such a distinct style that it can't really be helped. Even then, his artwork does mesh well with the others, so it's not like it feels out of place, it's just the only noticeable change. I cannot, for the life of me, tell where Scott Koblish or Mark Bernardo's pages are specifically. That is how well the styles blend together in this issue. The art team did a great job. It all comes together really well. While this issue wasn't anything at all like I wanted it to be, and yes, it does have a decent amount of problems, I gotta say I dug it. I actually think that I enjoyed it more now breaking it down than I did back when I first got it. I like the setup here, I like how complicated Rebel is as a character, I like the forces that he's up against, and I like that he isn't a straight-up forward hero at this point. I like that that's a journey that he has to go down to find that selflessness. And I do think that he's headed in the right direction, and I would love to know how he copes with having a child in his life now, assuming that it is his child. But obviously, I'm not going to hold my breath on that one, as Rebel makes one more appearance, and it's even further disconnected from this event than these events are disconnected from Chris Claremont's narrative. In this streak of episodes so far, I have talked a lot about how strange these one-shots are compared to what inspired them. Some are just huge, bold steps forward in the world of Heroes Reborn, like we have seen Claremont do with his Doomsday issue and Ashima issue. Others are strange because of the characters that they have chosen to focus on. Like, out of all the possible characters to pick, we have learned about the Masters of Evil and Rebel and his strange band. But those books have felt right so far. They all kind of match the tone of an embittered world, angry at its origins and the fate that it has been abandoned to. But next week, we are going wildly in the opposite direction. Things get a little funny next week in episode 12.18 of Comic Book Breakdown, Remnants. Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me, to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.